in a perfect world, all forms are filled out completely. There are no errors, no omitted fields, no attacks. Everything's fine. But of course, that's just not the reality. So we do need to validate all data coming from the client to the server, because we have to safeguard our application and our server. Thus, we need to validate all form data. For most form fields, that's actually pretty easy. We just check if we have non-empty values. So if we have a text field, we have a look whether there is something in the text field or not. We could add some special rules. For instance, 3 space characters are not considered as valid input. So we could use something like trim, removing white space at the beginning and at the end of a string. But basically, we can also check, is there something within the text field or not? Also, for radio buttons, we know that the value of the selected radio button is sent to the server. So if nothing is sent to the server, the radio button obviously hasn't been selected, none of them. Also for checkboxes, if no value arrives at the server, the user didn't activate the checkbox. If the checkbox was mandatory, such as in our example, the terms and conditions checkbox, then of course we have a validation error. For lists, we need special treatment. For instance, if we have our drop-down list, well, currently we always have to pick one of those colors in the drop-down list. But we could add an extra first entry in the list, a blank entry or an entry that says, please select something. And then we need to find out, well, did we pick that entry? Because that entry is not valid. It is not valid input. Please select something is not a valid input. Also, in the multiple selection list, well, we might have a look at which values have been selected and which ones have not been selected. Really, it depends on the use case. But basically, that's what we need to do. Of course, in order to provide a great user experience, we should consider using JavaScript to do the form validation. When JavaScript was created in the 1990s, the major use case for JavaScript actually was form validation. Also, HTML5 comes with new form validation features. This is pretty nice and gives immediate feedback to the user if there's an error when entering data into the form fields. However, this is just a usability feature. It does not add any security to our application, because an attacker could just deactivate JavaScript or just send the HTTP request anyway, even if the form hasn't been completely and validly filled out. So we always have to validate form data on the server. And that's what we are going to do right now in the code. Our printf statement here shall only be executed if the form has been submitted. That's what we check here. And if everything is okay. And that's what we'd like to find out. By default, we just assume that everything is okay, and then we try to prove the contrary. In the end, we just say if at the end, after validation, still everything is okay, then in that case, and only in that case, we output the form data. Okay? So, okay is true, and then we'll have a look at the individual fields. We start with the text field. Now, when is the text field not being filled out properly? First of all, we have to see if there is an entry $_post of name at all. And we can do this using a set. So if it's not a set $_post of name, then, well, we have an error. So we could set OK to false. However, browsers behave in a specific kind of way with text fields. If you leave the text field blank, $_post of name is set to, well, nothing. So we have to add a second check for that case. Or if $_post equals 2, and we use 3 equality signs, which doesn't only compare those values, but also checks whether both operands have the same data type, the empty string. So if the field hasn't been set or is empty, OK is false. Now, of course, we could turn $OK into a, let's say, string variable and not only say whether there have been any errors, but also where those errors are, which fields haven't been filled out completely. We won't do this here because we'd like to make other concepts clear, but still it would be rather trivial to do. Now let's continue with those other fields, and I can do quite an amount of copy and paste here. And we go to the password field. The password field counts as a text field, so the code is exactly the same. Same thing, of course, also holds true for the multi-line text field, so for comments. So that's pretty easy, actually. We also have the radio buttons, which is more or less the same code. However, if the radio button value is sent to the server, something, well, must have been picked. Still, there could be an attacker that crafts an HTTP request which sends gender, but no value with gender. So I just recommend we use exactly the same code here in order to find out whether the gender has been sent. And of course, also because it's related to the radio button, the terms and conditions checkbox has been sent. So far, so good, but there's still two more elements, the two lists. We first have the color list, and as I mentioned, we add another option, and we say this option just has an empty value. And we add something like, please select, something like this. Right? So we have a first entry which does not count as valid input. And we have to check for that. Now, if this value is selected, we have value equals empty string. So empty string is sent to the server, so our validation is still true. We can use copy and paste again also for the color selection list. So I just use color here and color here, and we are good. The last one, probably the most complex one, although it's not that bad, is the multi-selection list, the languages list. What could happen? Well, we could get nothing, so $_post of languages is not set. In that case, we have an error. The second option is that, well, it is sent, but nothing is in that list. So how do we find it out? Technically, it's an array, right? So we could check two things. First of all, is it an array? If it's not an array, something went wrong. Error, so the form hasn't been filled out completely. And if it is an array, it has to have at least one value in it, one element. And we'll check for all of those cases. So let's go up once more. One final, hopefully, copy and paste. And this time we'll have a look at $_post of languages. If it's not set, then something is wrong. So $k is set to false. Otherwise, if it's set, it could be the case that $_post of languages just is not an array. There's a built-in PHP function to check whether something is an array called, well, isArray. Yes, there is an underscore in the function name. There is no underscore in isSet. Well, that's just the way it is. I won't comment further on that. So if $_post of languages is not an array, then something is wrong. And well, third case, if it's an array, it could still be the case, thanks to a specifically crafted attack HTTP request, that there are no elements in the array. The count function gives us the number of elements in an array. So if count of $_post of languages is 0, in that case, if we have no elements in the array, then, well, something is wrong. So we set $k to false. So far, so good. Let's go to the web browser. Here we go again. We fill out the form and happen to forget a field. Let's say I forget to provide my gender. I provide all of the other values. I accept the terms and conditions, but again, I forgot the gender field, and prior to the form, we have the output, right? So I submit the form and no output because I forgot a field. Now let's do this right. This time I do provide my gender. I also provide the other fields. Submit the form again, and now I get the output again. So I have a form that validates more or less, but there is still room for a number of improvements.